They say history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes, and today something is quietly unfolding beneath the surface of our global financial system, something that could reshape the balance of power for decades to come. While most people are busy chasing the next tech trend or scrolling endlessly through social media, a silent financial war is being fought. Not with soldiers or weapons, but with gold. Because for the first time in half a century, the world's largest economies are preparing for a future where the US dollar might no longer dominate the global stage. And gold, that ancient metal humanity has trusted for thousands of years, sits at the center of this transformation. Gold has always been more than just a shiny metal. It's a universal symbol of stability, wealth, and power. Long before paper currencies existed, gold was money. Not because kings or governments declared it so, but because people across every civilization agreed on its value. It doesn't corrode. It's scarce, durable, and impossible to fake. For over 5,000 years, it has survived every empire's rise and fall. That changed in 1971. President Richard Nixon shocked the world when he closed the gold window, ending the direct convertibility of US dollars into gold. Until then, every dollar in circulation was backed by the promise that it could be exchanged for real gold at $35 an ounce. But after decades of war spending and government borrowing, the US printed far more money than it had in gold reserves. Other nations began to notice, and they started demanding their gold back. France even sent warships to New York to retrieve theirs. Nixon's solution was to temporarily suspend the gold standard. That temporary decision has lasted over 50 years. From that day forward, our global economy became backed not by gold, but by trust. Trust in the US government, trust in the Federal Reserve, trust that the dollar would always retain its value. But trust is fragile, and once it's broken, the entire system trembles. Fast forward to today, after decades of money printing, ballooning national debts, and the highest inflation rates in generations, cracks are beginning to appear in the foundation of that trust. Nations around the world, especially those outside of the West, are quietly taking notice, and their response has been simple. They're buying gold. In 2022 and 2023, central banks purchased more gold than at any time in the last half-century. China, Russia, India, Turkey, and even smaller countries like Poland and Singapore have been quietly building their reserves. But what's even more interesting is how secretive they've become about it. Some central banks stopped reporting their purchases altogether. Why? Because in a currency war, information is power. The less your opponent knows, the stronger your position. And that's exactly what this is, a financial war, fought not through trade tariffs or interest rates, but through control of real, tangible assets. The countries accumulating gold the fastest are the same ones challenging America's financial dominance. They call themselves BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. On the surface, they promote cooperation and trade, but beneath that, their goal is clear: to create a financial system independent from the US dollar. For nearly 80 years, the dollar has been the world's reserve currency. Every barrel of oil sold, every major trade deal, every global loan, all denominated in dollars. This gave the United States immense power. When the US imposes sanctions, it doesn't need to send troops. It simply cuts nations off from the dollar system, freezing their access to global trade. But that dominance is now being questioned. The BRICS alliance has openly discussed creating a new settlement currency, potentially backed by gold or other hard assets. If that happens, it could mark the most significant challenge to dollar supremacy since World War II. That's why they're stacking gold like never before. Gold, unlike dollars, cannot be frozen, hacked, or sanctioned. It represents financial sovereignty, power outside of the Western banking system. Meanwhile, in the United States, public opinion on gold couldn't be more different. Most Americans view gold as outdated, something their grandparents might have bought during the Great Depression. Financial media calls it a barbarous relic, a useless asset that pays no interest. But the irony is, behind closed doors, the biggest hedge funds, family offices, and billionaires are quietly increasing their exposure to gold. They understand a truth that ordinary people have forgotten. When a government cannot repay its debts, and when inflation eats away at purchasing power, the easiest solution is always to print more money. That's exactly what every empire has done before collapsing, from the Romans to the British to the early American Republic. And every time, gold emerged as the last form of real money left standing. The entire global system today rests on confidence. Confidence that the dollar means something, that government bonds are safe, that inflation is temporary. But confidence is not infinite. And when that confidence breaks, gold doesn't just go up in price, it becomes power itself. This is why central banks are fighting so hard in the shadows. The West believes in control through currency, the East believes in protection through gold. And in between them stands the average person, unaware that the value of their savings, their retirement, their entire financial future depends on the outcome of this quiet war. Every major shift in global finance happens slowly at first, and then all at once. That's the stage we're in right now. Slowly, quietly, methodically, the foundations of the dollar-based world order are being rewritten. But when the shift finally happens, it will seem sudden and shocking. Half a century after abandoning gold, the world is once again turning toward it, not because of nostalgia, but because of necessity. The US has enjoyed the privilege of printing the world's money, but every privilege comes with an expiration date. When debt spirals out of control, when confidence in paper fades, humanity always seeks something real, something that can't be printed, manipulated, or defaulted on. And that something is gold. Gold doesn't need a government's promise. It doesn't depend on a central bank's credibility. It simply exists, unchanging, incorruptible, trusted by generations. That's why in times of peace, people forget about it. But in times of uncertainty, everyone runs back to it. The hidden war over gold isn't about making profits. It's about who gets to decide the future of money itself. The East is preparing for a new system, while the West clings to the old one. One side is stockpiling tangible assets, the other is printing digital promises. Only one can win. Every empire that believed it could print its way to prosperity eventually learned the same lesson. Real wealth is not created by decree, it's preserved by discipline. So as the world inches closer to another financial reset, one question remains. When the music stops, what will you be holding? Paper or gold? And that's the hidden truth behind what's happening right now. The war isn't coming. It has already begun, quietly, invisibly, and one gold bar at a time. If you really want to understand where the world is heading, follow the gold. Because gold never lies. Governments do, central banks do, politicians do, but gold, it quietly tells the truth about the state of the global system. And lately, that truth has been alarming. Over the last few years, a massive and coordinated accumulation of gold has been taking place, not by retail investors, not by YouTubers or prepper channels, but by the most powerful financial institutions on the planet, the central banks. In 2022, they bought more gold than in any year since 1967, even more than during the financial crisis of 2008. That number wasn't an accident, it was a message. Something has changed in the way the world's money managers think about risk. For decades, they relied on the US dollar as their ultimate reserve, the bedrock of global trade and finance. But now, even they no longer trust it completely. The question is, why? To answer that, we have to look at what happened in 2022, the year that shattered the illusion of monetary safety. When the US froze Russia's $300 billion in dollar reserves after the invasion of Ukraine, it sent a chilling signal to every other nation. Your money isn't really yours if it was stored in the Western banking system. Overnight, the idea of safe reserves became a political weapon. If it could happen to Russia, it could happen to anyone. China, Saudi Arabia, even European allies if they ever stepped out of line. And that's when the rush for gold truly began. Because gold, unlike dollars, cannot be sanctioned, it doesn't depend on SWIFT networks or US banks. It sits quietly in vaults outside the reach of any foreign government. For the first time in modern history, gold has become a form of financial independence, the one asset immune to Western control. Countries like China and India began buying quietly through state-owned banks and intermediaries, often without recording their purchases on official ledgers. Russia ramped up its domestic gold mining and stopped exporting entirely. Turkey converted billions of foreign reserves into gold. Even nations with no history of large reserves like Uzbekistan and Egypt joined in. This is not random, this is strategy. For decades, the United States has enjoyed what economists call the exorbitant privilege. Because the dollar is the global reserve currency, America can print what others must earn. Other nations trade real goods, oil, steel, electronics, while the US trades paper promises. It worked beautifully until it didn't. Today, debt in the United States has crossed $35 trillion. Inflation, once thought to be transitory, has eaten into real wages, and global confidence in Washington's ability to manage its currency responsibly is fading. Central banks can see what's coming. They're preparing for a reset, a slow, deliberate rebalancing of global power. And gold is the anchor. In a system where everything is digital, gold is real. In a world of unlimited paper, gold is finite. In a financial order built on trust, gold is proof. This isn't just an economic move, it's psychological. For centuries, gold has been humanity's ultimate symbol of safety. When kings fell, governments collapsed, or empires dissolved, those who held gold never started from zero. They had something real when everything else turned to dust. Today's central bankers understand that truth better than anyone. That's why they're quietly rebuilding the same foundation the world abandoned half a century ago. But this time, it's happening without America's leadership. The People's Bank of China, for instance, has been the largest official buyer of gold for several years. But experts believe they're underreporting by a massive margin, storing additional reserves off the books, possibly in the hands of state entities like SAFE or the military. Analysts estimate China may already hold over 5,000 tons of gold, perhaps even more. Why would they hide it? Because transparency benefits the dollar, not them. Secrecy buys leverage. Russia, too, now backs parts of its domestic currency system with gold, creating a safety net against Western sanctions. And across the BRICS alliance, discussions about a gold-linked settlement system have accelerated, one that could eventually bypass the dollar entirely. Imagine a new digital currency backed not by faith but by metal. Every unit tied to a gram of gold, verifiable and transferable without US approval. That's the vision, and gold is the collateral that makes it credible. If this sounds familiar, it should. It is the very foundation that America itself used to build the dollar's global dominance after World War II. The US once held over 70% of the world's gold reserves. That's what gave the dollar its strength. But after decades of overspending and printing, those reserves have dwindled and confidence has eroded. Now other nations are simply replicating the same strategy America once used, but this time against America. That's the hidden irony of history. Empires always teach their rivals how to replace them. So when you see headlines about central banks diversifying reserves, don't be fooled. This isn't diversification, it's preparation. Preparation for a future where money itself might be redefined. Gold is not returning because of nostalgia. It's returning because the current system is stretched to its limit. The world is drowning in debt, currencies are losing credibility, and inflation has quietly become a permanent feature, not a temporary one. When systems fail, humanity returns to the things that have always worked. Gold is that thing. But this hidden accumulation isn't just about protecting national wealth. It's also about building leverage for negotiation, for the moment when global currencies are rebalanced and a new Bretton Woods emerges. That's what the bankers know, even if the public doesn't, and when that moment arrives, whoever holds the most gold will hold the most power. This isn't conspiracy, it's history repeating itself. Every financial system ends the same way, with too much debt, too much money printing, and too little trust. Gold is the final refuge before the reset. So as the world's central banks quietly prepare for the storm, the average person continues to believe everything is fine. The stock market is high, unemployment is low, and the headlines are comforting. But underneath that calm surface, something fundamental is shifting. Gold is moving, power is shifting, and the architecture of global finance is being rewritten in real time. When this transformation completes, most people won't even realize it happened, until it's too late. Their dollars will buy less, their savings will shrink, and their governments will blame unexpected events. But those who paid attention, those who understood gold's quiet message, will already have protected themselves. Because in every currency war, the winners are not those who print the most, but those who hold what cannot be printed. Gold doesn't care who runs the Federal Reserve. It doesn't care about elections or interest rates or politics. It simply sits there, untouchable, unchangeable, waiting for the world to remember why it mattered in the first place. and the world is remembering. Slowly, silently, one central bank vault at a time. Every empire falls the same way, not with a bang, but with the slow, quiet erosion of trust. The United States built its dominance on something extraordinary: confidence. Confidence that the dollar would always hold value. Confidence that US debt was the safest asset on earth. Confidence that America could always pay its bills. But confidence is like oxygen. You never notice it until it's gone. For decades, the world has financed America's way of life. Foreign nations bought trillions in US bonds, lending Washington the power to spend without limits. Wars, welfare, stimulus, all paid for with borrowed money. But what happens when the world stops believing the borrower will ever pay it back? That's the question haunting the global financial system right now. In 2008, the world saw the first tremor. The financial crisis exposed the truth. America's prosperity was built on debt. The solution? More debt. The Federal Reserve printed trillions, slashed rates to zero, and told everyone it had fixed the problem. Then came 2020. Another crisis. Another wave of printing. Even bigger this time. In just 2 years, the US created more money than in the entire history of the country combined. For a moment, it felt good. Markets soared. People got checks. Politicians celebrated. But money doesn't come from nowhere. Every dollar created steals value from every dollar already in existence. That theft is called inflation. And when inflation hit 40-year highs, the illusion cracked. Americans felt it at the grocery store, the gas pump, and in their savings accounts. Prices rose, wages didn't, and the strongest economy in the world suddenly felt fragile. Now, even America's biggest creditors are losing faith. China, once the largest foreign holder of US debt, has been quietly dumping treasury bonds for years. Japan is following suit. Nations across the global south are shifting away from the dollar system, not out of rebellion, but out of survival. Because the math no longer works. The US debt now exceeds $35 trillion, that's over $100,000 for every citizen, and growing by billions every day. Interest payments alone have become one of the largest expenses in the federal budget. The government is borrowing money just to pay the interest on what it already owes. This is what the end of a monetary cycle looks like. The world has seen this before, in Spain's empire, in Britain's, in Rome's. Each time the pattern is the same: overextension, overspending, and the belief that the center will never collapse. But it always does. Rome debased its silver coins to pay for wars. Britain printed notes far beyond its gold reserves to finance its empire. And America? It prints digital dollars backed by nothing but promises. Promises that fewer and fewer people believe. That's why gold matters again. Because gold doesn't make promises. While Washington argues about budgets and debt ceilings, other nations are quietly building a parallel system. A world that doesn't see ET depend on the dollar. The BRICS countries are leading that charge, but they're not alone. The Middle East, Africa, and even parts of Europe are exploring alternatives. In 2023, for the first time ever, global trade between China and Russia was settled mostly in yuan, not dollars. Saudi Arabia, the cornerstone of the petrodollar system, began accepting other currencies for oil. That's not just a policy shift. That's a seismic event. For nearly 50 years, the world's most valuable commodity, oil, was tied to the US dollar. It forced every country to hold dollars, creating constant demand. But when that tie breaks, the dollar loses its engine. And when demand for dollars falls, its value will follow. This is the beginning of de-dollarization. Not a sudden crash, but a slow, relentless decline. Each trade settled in another currency, each ton of gold added to reserves, each central bank diversifying away from treasuries. It is one more crack in the foundation of dollar supremacy. The American public hasn't noticed yet because the effects are still subtle, but history is clear. Once a currency loses its global status, it never comes back. Look at Britain. Before World War II, the pound sterling ruled global trade. London was the financial center of the world. But war, debt, and inflation changed everything. When the US replaced the UK at Bretton Woods in 1944, it wasn't just about economics, it was about power. Now, 80 years later, that same transition is happening again. Slowly, quietly, inevitably. And once again, gold sits at the heart of it. When trust in paper collapses, the world turns to metal. It's happened every time. Because gold doesn't care who's in power. It doesn't depend on Wall Street's algorithms or the Fed's policies. It simply is. But this isn't just about governments, it's about individuals too. In times of monetary transition, the middle class always gets crushed. They hold their wealth in the wrong form and in currencies, pensions, savings accounts, all of which lose value as the system resets. The rich protect themselves with assets, land, businesses, art, and increasingly, gold. That's why you see billionaires quietly buying physical gold again. Ray Dalio, Stanley Druckenmiller, and even institutions like JP Morgan have been accumulating. Not because gold pays interest, but because it doesn't need to. When confidence collapses, yield doesn't matter. Survival does. And make no mistake, the collapse of confidence is already underway. The world isn't waiting for the dollar to fall, it's already acting as if it has. The US still has immense power, but power built on debt and trust is fragile. The moment people stop believing, the entire structure wobbles. That's the danger no one talks about on mainstream TV, the silent breaking point where the rest of the world stops playing by America's rules. That's what gold represents. It's the exit door from a burning building. The irony is that the US taught the world how to use gold to build power, and now that same lesson is being used against it. When the final reckoning comes, it won't look dramatic. There won't be tanks or headlines. It'll start with something small, a failed bond auction, a sudden sell-off, a quiet panic in the currency markets. Then, like dominoes, confidence will crumble. And when people ask what happened to the dollar, history will already have written the answer. It died the same way every empire's currency dies, through arrogance, overreach, and the illusion that it could print wealth forever. At that moment, gold will not just be a commodity, it will be the measure of truth, the one thing that can't be inflated, manipulated, or defaulted on. And as the world shifts toward a new financial order, those who understand that truth early will not just survive, they'll thrive. Because the hidden war over gold is not really about metal, it's about trust. And trust, once broken, never returns. There's a moment in every empire's story when the people stop asking, "Can it happen here?" and start whispering, "It's already happening." That's where we are right now. The debt is unpayable, the inflation is structural, the politics are broken, and the only thing holding the US economy together is a fragile illusion that this can somehow go on forever. But every illusion has an expiration date. Behind closed doors, the most powerful institutions in the world, central banks, the IMF, the BIS, even the tech giants, are preparing for what they call the reset. They won't call it collapse, they'll call it modernization. They won't say they're destroying the dollar, they'll say they're upgrading it. And that's how every new system begins. Not with revolution, but with rebranding. The plan is already in motion. It starts with CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, the digital dollar. To most people, it'll sound convenient. Instant payments, no cash, no fees. But beneath the surface, it's the biggest transformation of money in 100 years. Because when money becomes programmable, control becomes total. Every transaction tracked. Every purchase monitored. Every dollar coded to expire, be frozen, or redirected. You won't own your money anymore. You'll just use it under conditions set by the issuer. And if you think that sounds like dystopia, you're not alone. Countries like China have already perfected this model with their digital yuan, combining financial data with social control, spend too much on the wrong things or speak out against the system, and suddenly your balance stops working. That's not conspiracy theory, that's the prototype for the next financial order, and the West is following fast. The Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, and dozens of others are experimenting with CBDCs under the same excuse. We need to compete with crypto. But here's the irony. The rise of Bitcoin and decentralized finance was supposed to free people from central control. Instead, it woke the system up, forced it to evolve, to create a digital cage of its own. So what does this have to do with gold? Everything. Because gold is the one thing they can't digitize away. You can't hack it, you can't print it, you can't delete it with a keystroke. In the coming reset, digital money will dominate transactions, but real wealth will once again depend on real assets. That's why central banks themselves, not retail investors, not influencers, have been buying gold at record pace. In 2022 and 2023, central banks purchased more gold than in any year since records began, and they're not stopping. Ask yourself, why are the very institutions creating digital currencies hoarding physical gold? Because they know what comes next. They know that when the reset happens, confidence must be rebuilt on something tangible, and history has proven, time and again, that gold is the ultimate anchor of trust. But for everyday Americans, this transition won't feel like a reset. It'll feel like a storm. Jobs will disappear as automation and AI accelerate. Savings will erode as the dollar weakens. Taxes will rise, benefits will shrink, and the middle class, already hanging by a thread, will find itself caught between inflation and control. The rich won't suffer. They'll adapt. They'll own assets. They'll own systems. They'll own you. But here's the truth that almost no one on TV will say: you don't have to be a victim of this reset. The same tools the elite use to protect themselves are available to anyone who understands the game early. Gold, silver, Bitcoin, hard assets, real businesses. These aren't just investments anymore. They're forms of freedom insurance, because in a future where money is programmable, privacy is power. In a world where every transaction can be controlled, ownership becomes rebellion. The next decade will divide people into two classes: those who trust the system and those who understand it. If you trust it, you'll wait for the government to fix inflation, protect your money, and stabilize the markets. If you understand it, you'll realize the system isn't broken. It's being rebuilt by design to serve fewer and control more. And gold, the simplest, oldest, most boring asset on Earth, might just be your quiet escape hatch. That's why the story of gold isn't about price. It's about power. The power to say no, the power to opt out, the power to keep what's yours when everything else gets redefined. The average person doesn't think that far ahead. They live month to month, paycheck to paycheck, believing tomorrow will look like today. But the wealthy, the powerful, the architects of this new system, they're already years ahead. They're building the new world while everyone else argues about the old one. History doesn't repeat, it resets. And when it does, there's always a moment, a small window, where those who see it coming can position themselves on the right side of the shift. This is that window. The question is simple: will you be holding paper or power? Because when the storm hits, and it will, the price of gold won, just rise. It will reveal who understood the system and who got played by it. And when the dust settles, when the digital currencies roll out, when trust in the dollar finally collapses under its own weight, people will look back and realize the war over gold was never about wealth. It was about freedom. And those who prepared, quietly, early, wisely, will not just survive the reset. They'll own the future that comes after it.